Hello, good morning. This is day 51 of videos to describe a day of the thoughts and the life of me as a schizophrenic. It is done to express some sanity amidst the world turning things around and saying that I am crazy after the world went crazy. And so, yeah, uh, I I'm not going to do the intro anymore. I'm just going to point you to my Facebook pinned post, which has day 45 and day which has the intro and the first 3 minutes, and day 17 which has uh, the explanation why I use schizophrenia instead of targeted individual. So if you want to know those things, you can watch those videos and it will explain that to you. All right. So 1 minute in is the intro, I guess, from now on. All right. So today I was going to start my talking points, and I'm I added a seventh language to my Duo Lingo. I have a lot of time on my hands, being unemployed, disabled, schizophrenic, and so I've now added Danish to the list. But the hardest language that I'm learning so far has been French. It's very difficult, particularly in understanding what the Duolingo teacher is saying in the listening section. It's very difficult for me to make out like what the guy is saying, and I don't know, uh, because I think about these time travel things. I start thinking like, did the French try to go back and create like a particular type of unique language, like I don't know. So yeah, so French is the hardest so far. All right, I'm gonna go into my book about Noah Yuval Harari, and he is expressing that in the pages that I'm reading. I'm in the early pages of the book, but he expresses that capitalism constantly needs to grow or it will crumble. That our economic system will, if it doesn't grow endlessly, it will crumble to the ground, and it will basically go into turmoil. And this is obviously a problem when resources are finite. So what happens is we start to come up with endless projects to work on, such as immortality and endless bliss or perpetual bliss or whatever. And so perpetual bliss and immortality are not necessarily bad things, but so uh I wouldn't mind immortality myself, and perhaps this gets into like some things I've talked about previously about like maybe there's on some level there's immortality. Like Ted Williams froze his body in cryogenics for the purpose of coming back to life one day when they figured that out. But maybe they could clone us and download our consciousness and all that for a particular thing, or beam us into space to some advanced civilization. I've talked about those things in the past. So yeah, so Harari was talking about like we need endless projects to uh, work on as a society in order to grow, because we constantly have to grow in some way. So I suppose if we could grow the economy in a way that doesn't use up natural resources, that's actually a good thing. So now that's not necessarily bad in and of itself if we're going to keep the capitalist system, and it appears that we are for now. Uh, I wouldn't mind moving to some sort of new hybrid system or something like that. So yeah. Okay, David A. Hughes, speaking of moving to new system, in his book about the war for technocracy, COVID-19, and psychological operations, and the war for technocracy, he in the opening pages, it seems like he's calling for, as far as I'm reading right now, like I say, read these books slowly, but he seems to be calling for uh, global revolutionary war. And so I don't know necessarily that I could get behind a war language, because once you start using war language, you're opening up quite a Pandora's box when you open up when you start saying war. And so, you know, uh, yeah, I don't know. But that's what he's talking about right now. And so I'm reading along, and I'll keep you posted on that front. I haven't really listened to his podcasts before in the targeted individual community. I figured I would read his book, and that would be good enough. Uh, but you know, if you're talking about war, there's going to be a counter to the war. There's going to be a counter war, and people are going to be caught up in between. And really, they've got the powers that be in the class war. He talks basically he talked about how like there's been a global uh, transnational uh, crackdown on lower classes of the world through militant. Like I think he said something like at one point during the Eisenhower or the Kennedy years or one of the maybe the Reagan years or whatever. There was up to 36 new military dictatorships in the world that were added to the previous military dictatorships. And so he was saying that nearly a quarter of all countries in the world were military dictatorships, and that class interests around the world, transnational class interests, were wedded together to create a counter revolution on the lower classes. And so that's a very interesting book. I know that there's a lot of researchers and academics that have studied political history, which have posited such scenarios before. So he's a PhD guy, so I'm reading his book. I haven't gotten into what he says about COVID or anything like that yet. All right, I'm going to read something out of this book, War at the Speed of Light, that I said I was going to read out of on my Facebook page. And essentially, this is going to show that psychiatry were illegitimate. Why would they not examine the cause of voice hearing? And can they even say that it's possible that voice hearing, how could they even say that voice hearing is a disease and know for sure and not question the possibility that it's not a disease? And so I'm going to read out of this book and you'll see why I say that. So now this book is written by a CEO of Honeywell, which is a corporation in the military industrial complex. It's a major corporation in the military industrial complex. And this man he's also a physicist, and so he's a kind of renowned mainstream figure. And he discusses something called Frey Affect weapons, and he says these weapons cause people to perceive they hear a sound. In 2003, Waveband Corporation received a contract from the U.S. Navy to design a microwave weapon for military crowd control. According to New Scientist, which is a media outlet, the project transitioned to Sierra Nevada Corporation in 2008 and its product MEDUSA, which stands for Mob Excess Deterrent Using Silent Audio, is a microwave ray gun that causes people to perceive they hear painfully loud booms. The New Scientist reports MEDUSA involves a microwave auditory effect, loud enough to cause discomfort or even incapacitation. So the author goes on, he says, unfortunately, much like the Moscow signal and Havana syndrome, some experts suggest MEDUSA may also cause neural damage. In addition to the victims appearing to hear voices and noises, the weapon may disrupt a person's balance, cause fevers, and trigger epileptic type seizures. The U.S. Army and potentially the U.S. Secret Service is using MEDUSA or similar technology, as well as technology described in another U.S. patent. Okay, he goes on further, but I just wanted to stop there and really focus on the fact that he said the U.S. Secret Service and the U.S. Army but he said potentially the U.S. Secret Service and the U.S. Army definitely is using MEDUSA. So, MEDUSA produces voices in people's heads. Now, if you have people running around telling you, I hear voices in my heads, and psychiatry is not examining, like, oh, we know that there is a weapon system that can produce the voices in the head, and they don't ask you any questions about your political activity or any questions about, do you think that do you think that you might be in conflict with the U.S. Army or the U.S. Secret Service, or do you have any reason to believe that those two entities would possibly be interested in causing you voices? And uh, yeah, so he goes on and says in 1996, the U.S. Air Force filed a patent for a method and device for implementing the radio frequency hearing effect. The patent delineated a device that would cause victims to perceive hearing voices. The U.S. Patent and Trade Office granted the patent in 2002. In fundamental terms, this is how it works. The inner ear has secretions filled with air and fluid that are vulnerable to microwaves at specific frequencies. The human head acts as an antenna for microwaves, and when the head receives these microwaves signals, they slightly heat those inner ear sections, causing them to expand and shift. The human body does not feel the heat or expansions, but the ear records the shifts. The ear's design requires it to interpret the variations as sound, which is a function of the microwave frequency. By modulating the frequencies, changing the shifts in the inner ear, it is possible to form words. The volume at which the sound is heard is a function of the power of the microwaves. So this again shows that this U.S. Air Force has an ability to send worded messages to people's ears at a distance, and they have a technology to do it. So the U.S. Army, the U.S. Air Force, and the U.S. Secret Service are known entities that have this technology. Now, I'm not pointing the finger at these particular organizations and saying that's who's doing it to me. Now, Targeted Justice says that it's all comes out of Colorado Springs, and I think it's a U.S. Army base there that they're saying that it comes out of. Maybe it's an Air Force base. I don't know. But it just shows that this technology exists in the world. And so when somebody, I think I've expressed here some pretty sane ability and thinking and contemplation that it should be questioned whether or not I am diseased like schizophrenic or something else is at play. Like if once you hear voices, there's potentially an example of somebody targeted by militant organizations. And so, yeah, I know I talked about other things that cannot be explained by simple voice hearing. So I can't really prove those things, but I just think the voice hearing itself is indicative of potentially a weapon system. And so I just wanted to read that out of that book. And yeah, so now yesterday the voices told me to stop pandering. And basically, if I ever say anything that that's not scripted, and it's like kind of comes from my own, I don't pander here. I just say what I definitely think about things. I happen to make it a point to say things that I think are going to be uh, digested by people in a proper way. I'm not trying to be bombastic and stuff like that. So, like, I guess they're saying like don't pander, like stop trying to be nice to people or something. I'm not sure what they mean by don't pander, but I'm not pandering here. I just tell you what I think. I try to be measured as a human being. I'm not trying to be outlandish or anything like that. So, yeah. So, I'm not pandering here, but the voices said don't pander, and I just expressed in that book how the voices are potentially a weapon system. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here because it's been 15 minutes. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.